Hi to everybody. Hoping it's a nice day as it is for you guys as it is here. It's really nice, a little bit on the cool side, but pretty doggone nice. So we'll just get right into it. And this Shoreline Incentive Programs was started, and for better or worse, I've been around since before it started, so I kind of know it fairly well. And we're in kind of a unique situation in that Burnett County is kind of located, as you see, right on the edge of Wisconsin, close to the Twin Cities. And what's interesting about it is a lot of people commute to work, plus the fact that we were discovered many years ago by the Twin Cities residents. And so we are a second home community similar to the Brainerd area or any of those over in Minnesota as well. So Friday night is always interesting, and over the weekend it is. I believe I am in Minnesota every weekend because 8 of the 10 cars are actually from Minnesota, maybe 9 of them. Anyway, we have a lot of water, mostly more lakes than water, interestingly enough, and that creates an issue because, of course, with the type of lakes we have, they're much more prone to development, and the number of lots per mile, really per lake acre, really increases because we have so many small lakes. So we have a lot of shoreline to deal with. And here's kind of how our surface water is distributed. And this is kind of one of the things that I'm going to just show a little bit here on how it got frustrating for the county board and stuff and what was happening back in the 1980s. And this was just a little lake. It's called the Frimstead Watershed, but the lake right underneath the pink arrow is Frimstead Lake. And the little one to the right now, of course, was newly named Rainbow Lake by the development company that bought it. So there you are, 1990s. Oh, things are just fine, no problem. Oh, geez, here's 2004. What's happening here? It's starting to get a little busy. Well, that is about 2010 right in there, maybe a little bit after. And this, of course, is our projected build out if we did that. So water quality was really getting to be on the minds of the county board and a lot of lake people and that sort of thing because it was getting to be a significant issue. The property values were jumping up, the building permits were skyrocketing, so it was really a kind of an intense time. And I have to put this in because along with development, what does it come is, of course, the classic erosion. This guy thought he was doing it right, but if you look up here, what he didn't realize is he's got a great big pole shed, a big circle driveway, and a bunch of mowed lawn up here. And then he did a new addition off to the left and turned around and piped it all into one little spot here. And then, when you put that much water together, it doesn't work very well. So those are the other types of issues, and we're still getting those too. So, but the county board was very frustrated with that. So it basically boiled down to why did the county board want to plan? What was the thing? Because they were really going back and forth. And if you see a lot of these, and the population does triple, we're 15, 16,000 in the wintertime, we're 60,000 on a typical summer weekend. Well, maybe not so much this spring, but you'd be surprised how many people are up and I'll call it sheltering in place at their cabin. And but most everything that really boiled down to zoning meetings and the county boards, they were really frustrated what to do. Should we give this guy a conditional use? Should we do not? What's happening? And they just didn't feel that they had a very good guidance and one, how to protect their water quality, because of course when you have that many second homes, the value of that water is very important to for tax revenue for obvious reasons. And so what they did back, this was, I believe, 1997, they created a long range plan to guide growth in the county. And they made a committee up, which of course, all of us guys like myself and the zoning administrator and extension people, we were all the attached to this. But it was a very good group. And what's interesting about it, one of the things that came out of this is it really strengthened which was at the time a fairly newly formed Burnett County Lakes and Rivers Association. So that's really made that into a much better organization today from them being on that group. And it's actually now to the point where the Lakes and Rivers Association has a seat on our committee called the Natural Resources Committee, which deals with our land and water conservation issues. And so that's what we had for the planning components. Pretty much basic. Really, what you're looking at here is the developed implementation tools. That's where the Shoreline Incentive Program comes in as far as that goes. And what was interesting, because this is fairly new to a very rural county like Burnett and planning and stuff like this. So we spent basically a year and a half basically going through everything. We had meetings, we had this, and you can see the basically all the different things we did here. This is the interesting one. We did over 11. We sent every property owner a survey, and there was over 100 pages of comments that came back. I personally read every one of them, and a bunch of other people did as well. And it was everything from blow out the bridges coming into the county to why isn't there a Walmart on the corner? So yeah, it's everything. But it was a very good. We needed to know. We knew we needed to have a good education effort, because as we were moving forward with additional regulations, that they had to support them and the county board had to support them. This is what boiled out of that is lakeshore degradation, boating conflicts. PWCs were pretty loud at the time, so that was an issue. Billboards, lost community control, those types of things are very frustrating. Unfortunately, we're seeing some of the same things right now today. And some of the other community issues which this came through loud and clear, was the stronger enforcement of the existing ordinance. And that basically was focusing on shoreline zoning and different things like that. And a lot of people wanted a new, stronger, better, clearer enforcement ordinance for that. And we actually did, is we actually created a much more clear shoreline buffer ordinance that was different than the state model was out there, because previous to that it was very hard for a judge to understand. It was the first 30% of the first 35 of this and that, blah blah blah, and every judge would throw up their eyes. So we made it very clear that you do not touch the first 35 foot. That's basically what it boiled down to, which is our primary buffer, and you'll see. And we've had this anecdotal evidence for many years that such as came out of Maine, come out of Minnesota. I believe Bemidji State did some work there about the value of water quality. Well, as we go through and this program has been maturing, is we didn't have the information locally till August of 2016 with this study, which really made it nice, because then I could bring this forward to the county board now and say, yes, the money that you're spending on this program is worth it because, and we'll go into that. And it literally lays a dollar value on it. This happens to be Lake Kachuk in Sawyer County, Wisconsin. But the fact that Sawyer County's, that their tax rate, that'd bring in another 112 from thousand from one lake. So we were very lucky. We had one of the lakes in Burnett County in there, and that was Yellow Lake, which is, I'll put it this way, it's fairly eutrophic. So the increase we would get to that, and again, this is the selling points that you have to look at that. How do the people in the position to make these decisions appreciate and understand the need for this? In this case, that's almost a 6% increase in value. And so what would that value on Yellow Lake? And we actually took the amount of parcels around the lake, the value of that, and did it by the 5.99%. And so basically that means that the direct gain or loss to the county from 3 foot of water clarity is $32,000 a year. And you think about that times 500 lakes. If we lose or gain, that's quite a significant chunk of change. So that's kind of why the county board is willing to work with us and to do this, because they understand the value of that. They understand it. And it's pretty common too. I got one lake has a Secchi dish reading of 25 foot or greater, highest property values in the county. It's just a given. The one with 5 foot, not so much. So now that was kind of the history of that. It's starting on the history, but this is kind of how it started out with the land use plan in 97. And we created another small subcommittee, the Shoreline Restoration Committee. And we've been doing voluntary assistance already. And we went to another lake protection grant, is what they were called at the time, in 99. And in 2000, the county board passed the tax incentive program, the Shoreline Incentive. So what does the land use shoreline protection reclamation. And of course, they did a lake classification system, which was good, which unfortunately now the state legislature has changed it back to what it was before. But before, we basically were sizing the lots based on the vulnerability of the water body itself and how to manage future development and the restoration preservation of shoreline, which is obviously what we're talking about today. So that developed into the Natural Shorelines program or Shoreline Incentive. And what does it include? And that is the technical assistance, of course, which we've already been offered, and financial assistance, which is basically what we found here is that one of the concepts that we were looking at, it's much easier to get landowners to participate in something on a voluntary basis if they're even rewarded in a small way. We had an idea that we were going to give about $100 per parcel or $150. We didn't have really a good idea, but that's we thought, well, maybe that would work. So we took that to a couple of focus groups and we found out that $50 a year would be enough of a significant chunk of change to the people that they would be willing to participate in it. And it is proved to be quite true. And it gets somewhat back into the altruistic things. It gets into a bunch of different things as far as it goes. But we're at the $50 and everybody seems to be happy with it. And we'll pass on, we'll talk about some of what they are too. And then we have the incentives and of course then the education and outreach we've been doing, and we continue to do that today. And of course your technical assistance, it includes the site visits, and of course the landscape design and planning information and trained landscapers and different things like that. One of the nice things that came about it and the publicity of the program and the fact that we have a pretty strict, very clear shoreline ordinance compared to the most counties and states as far as it goes is it's really gotten people aware that they have to call and ask. It's surprising how many calls I get, and I wish I probably get more because I'm sure I don't get them all, of people asking what can they do along the shoreline? Can we cut this tree? Can we not cut this tree? You know, then we go through the whole litany of different things. And there's always the safety issue. If it's in there, I'll be glad to allow them to cut an extra tree or something like that if they need to from a safety standpoint. And then most of them are really happy to do that and plant a tree in place of it. And of course, we even train the landscapers as far as it goes. And that was an interesting one. Eligible sites, it would be any shoreline that already has the first 35 foot intact, or we offer the cost sharing to restore it voluntarily, or if the restoration is completed for a land use permit. Because one of the things that was put in with the package of ordinances when we created this program is when we strengthened the buffer ordinance is the fact that if you had a non-conforming structure to get a permit, which has actually made it easier on the landowner, all you had to do was restore a buffer and then you got the permit without going through committee action. You basically, the zoning office could do it. So once you had that restoration complete, you could actually enter it in the shoreline program as far as it goes. And as far as program promotion goes, is when it first started, it was word of mouth and it was pretty crazy on that. We still do Lake Association presentations. We do the newsletter. Burnett County Lakes and Rivers Association has a newsletter. Actually, it is going out this week, as a matter of fact. Our county lake people, it goes out to all of the lake cabin owners in the county, and we do have a little blurb because we just got a new grant, so we're starting to accept applications again for our program. And we have brochures and we do have some on our website, but mostly newsletters and Lake Association presentations where most of the things come through, and from actually a lot of the neighbors and different things like that. When we first started, there would be a few on a lake, but as you see, it's interesting, and it's just kind of call it a conceptual attitude shift a little bit as people on a lake see that more people are doing this and keeping a natural shoreline. It kind of seems like it's more the norm instead of the typical, you know, golf course, green grass and trees that are limbed up 15 foot right down to the perfectly blue water, that kind of thing. that stays at the perfect elevation forever, as long as they ever own their cabin. We won't talk about high water because I know some of us have it now, and it's been a real frustrating for a lot of people. So anyway, how does a person participate in the program? They can just contact us. It's basically simple. We just name, address, location, and we pretty much can take it from there. We go out, we do a site inspection, and if there is any recommendations for planting, in a lot of cases, it just say, oh, you need another 5 foot, or you need to squeeze your viewing corridor, or something like that. Some cases, it's a complete restoration, but most cases it's usually not, because that's kind of the type of people that we usually get. That's one thing that I will put a plug in for the Wisconsin Healthy Lakes program, is that what had came out of this program and other people is that for a lot of people that have I hate to use the word, but traditional lake type settings with, the very, what I mentioned before, the grass and no veg and things like that, is for them 35 foot is a very significant amount to do in one step. So what we found is, and that's one of the things the Healthy Lakes program does, is they allow a landowner to do 350 fair square foot native planting and to kind of get used to it. And then that kind of gets them down the path, because sometimes that just one person or whoever just said, oh my God, 35 foot of whatever you want to call it is holy Toledo. It's terrible. And the restrictive covenant is interesting. And this basically is a covenant that says, I agree to follow shoreline zoning that was in place at the time the program was enacted. The only difference from the current shoreline zoning is what the legislature decided to do here a year or two ago, was change the viewing access corridor width on a 100-foot lot from 30 to 35 foot. We still have the 30 foot in there. And it's basically, in essence, it's basically saying, I agree to follow shoreline zoning. And that really, when people understand that, especially new landowners, then it's not quite as big of a deal as it is. That's basically all we were going for, is good compliance. But we've also had all sorts of interesting comments about the covenant itself. And there are people that absolutely will not sign it because it's a sign a piece of paper on their property that they do not want to have anything to do with, even though they have a perfectly intact buffer. But it's just, they just don't want to. To the other place where we've had people come in and they've expected that they're, the $250, which I'll show you in a second, is one of the incentives. They want to pay us the $250 to participate. So it's interesting to see the different attitudes that you get all the way across the board. And if they need to do a resto, then we'll get that completed. Then we go back out and inspect it again. Everything's hunky dory. Then we award the incentives. And of course, some of the things that we have here that's a little unique to Burnett County, and it's sure not unique to just us, but we have very sandy soils. All of this stuff in the yellow is basically sand, and more sand, and not such great sand either. The little darky yellow is a slightly better grade of sand, but it's very dry. It's prone to erosion. If you think back to our lake map, you think of, that's where all of the lake people are. Down here in our yellow is our little bit of what we call better soil, silt loams, different things like that. And that's where some of our agricultural is too. Seepage lakes are really unique thing around here. Is I'm going to say 85–90% of our lakes are seepage, and we have dramatic fluctuations in water levels, is from everything from, it's several feet. Right now we're in a very high period, and our pine forest, so we have a little bit of not much of an understory and ground cover, so we have to look at that. So it's kind of, it makes it really acidic, and we've kind of came through, but it's worked out. And by the way, what I did before we started this program is we were doing the buffer to make sure we were on solid ground, whether it was just for plant stuff or even if we had to go through court or something like that. I had a botanist come up and inventory undisturbed sites on such as like county forest land where it hasn't been ever bothered at all and developed. And then we developed our native plant list from that. And of course, we have the buffer dimensions here, pretty much basic for the state of Wisconsin, very similar. Like I said, the only thing different now is there's a 35-foot for shoreline zoning instead of 30-foot. We still stick with 30-foot, and it's set back 35-foot. We don't do too much on that 15-foot limited cut and prune here. We really just focus in on mostly the 35-foot primary buffer. And of course, a classic little site plan as far as it goes, pretty much do it. I didn't show it, not going to show it, but on the back, there's a nice spot to put a plant list, different things like that. And that's where you see 21, and back I'd have 21 and say, okay, these are the plants for area 21. And then we allow people to kind of design it or colorize it, if you will, as they want. So. And we did have a landscaper workshop. We haven't done one since the beginning now, but it went very well. Polk County, Burnett County, and UW Extension cooperated on this, and we actually had one up here in Burnett, one down in Polk. It went very well. It was a very good exercise for them, and they hung in there. They did a lot of buffers for us for a long time. It's gradually changed now. So if we do get people that want, or excuse me, companies, I should say, that are interested in designing buffers and different things like that, we basically work with them one-on-one. Interestingly enough, in Polk County, which is a little bit closer to the Twin Cities, they have a tendency of having more landscapers do their work. Whereas up here in the past, it's had a tendency to have the landowners do the installation themselves. It's gradually getting to the point of starting to move towards landscapers up here too. And we did, of course, all sorts of education and information things. We did a buffer restoration video, which was kind of nice. It was one of the local lakes around here. And what the guys receive in the program is a shoreline shirt, which you'll see in a minute, and a participation sign, which is really one of the surveys we did a couple of years ago. The last one, I shouldn't say a couple of years ago, a lot more than that, is we found that the participants weren't particularly enthusiastic about the signs. Not all of them, but there was a significant percentage that really didn't care about putting the sign out. We didn't bother to ask why, but just maybe they want the buffer, but they don't want whatever that goes along with it. So we made the participation sign to be optional as far as it goes. And we're fine. Most people take them and put them up, but that's whatever we did. And the monetary incentives is we give $250 up front along with the shirt and the sign, and that's basically to enroll it. And of course, our cost sharing is 70%, and that's of both materials and installation labor costs. So if you do it yourself, you're going to probably do okay on it. If you hire a landscaper, you'll probably break even. And then, of course, the $50 a year property tax credit, which it was a credit, and I'll get into that a little bit more later, what it is right now. But that's the one that seems to bring people in. Okay, and here's a little bit of a shot of our signs and shirts and such like that. We kind of picked our logo out there, and it's worked out well. Actually, Healthy Lakes in Wisconsin has appropriated a little bit of it too. So we're kind of trying to get everything together and keep it in one thing. And this is the sign, of course, that some people don't like. Some people love them. I've seen people put them on both the lake side and the road side, or either one or both. It's hard to tell. Some people like to advertise, some people don't. And some of the things we've also developed through this is we got the buffer restoration guide here in the middle, which is basically just a how-to guide for new planting, buffers and how to prep it, what to use. And in the back end of this, we have a very nice, basically it's a plant list. It's based on the type of overstory you have. Is it oaks? Is it pine? Is it, what kind of overstory it is? Is it full sun, half sun, no sun, that kind of thing? So it works out very well. It's a really nice form one. This is we also did the checklist for runoff. One of the things that we found as we've gotten into this is runoff is very critical. One, for just water quality, of course, but also is the buffer wasn't doing the job that it was supposed to, and it actually was kind of hard on the buffer if you had excessive runoff. So we developed a self evaluation checklist, and more importantly, this one we did as well, is controlling runoff and erosion from your waterfront. It's a really nice booklet that we use. It's got a lot of different things in it, how to fix things up. It talks about, you know, bumps and diversions and et cetera, et cetera. This was a very nice book. Bayfield County, ourselves, and the state of Wisconsin, through a grant, participated in this. I believe the Healthy Lakes program uses this as well. So we did a couple surveys a couple of times, and we did this, I believe the first one was in 2005, and I think the second one was somewhere 2010s or early teens, probably about time to do another one. And we basically just asked some questions about what they thought about the program, and take into account this is people that are already in the program, so it's a significantly biased group as far as it goes. And you can kind of see how it is. And it was word of mouth, neighbors, and like presentations. And what we were looking at too, does it improve your water quality? Yes. Do you think it improves the beauty? Yes. And what was interesting is the economic value, which we know now that water quality does, but they weren't quite as convinced of the economic value of a buffer. But they still, it was much more positive than it was negative by far. And the three most important reasons you'd have the, you know, obviously water quality, habitat, that kind of thing. So that was good. What was the most important incentive? The tax credit, interestingly enough, was first, and that's basically 50 bucks. And then the cost sharing and the cash that they got. And then, of course, the trinkets assured for last. What we also wanted to know was if you're not going to program or didn't do, because I believe we had some people on the list that were signed up but never entered in. And the buffer depth, like I talked about before, was a little bit that really bothered some people. The cost was too much. I have a little hard time in the fact that we were picking up 70% of the cost, but whatever they said, and not enough tax credit. And in some ways, I definitely agree with that. And one of the reasons we'll get into in one of the later slides here is one of the things that we didn't do, or I'll rephrase that, we did do, was put it on a parcel basis because it was the most logical way for the county to get that out. And I'll explain more as we're kind of moving along here. And this is exactly it, because the tax credit is now a property tax refund. It is not a credit anymore. It is because we had it on, or wanted to have it on, the tax bill itself, is we were going to make it a credit. So in other words, there was literally, when you got your tax bill, and I got a chunk on a little font, so I would see it, it says shore credit minus 50 right on your tax bill. So your net tax would be minus the 50 bucks. The state didn't particularly like that because we were thinking a little bit on the county level, and it was a state form technically. And then also, it was quite a tough issue for our county treasurer to work with, because interestingly enough, the contortions that it made her go through, because it was money that the county was supposed to receive but did not receive. So it made it much harder for her to reconcile the county books because it was a income tax credit. So what we had to do a bunch of years ago is basically convert it to, it is a refund now, technically, or whatever you'd want to call it, a rebate or however. And what we do is we go through, and every year, we, in fact, we're probably starting it right now. Well, I'm not, but somebody is you go through, reconcile all of the addresses and things like that with that. And then we turn around and ship that down to the treasurer, and they cut a $50 check for every landowner that is in the program and send it out. It's a bit more expensive this way, but when it gets right down to it, for the contortions, the county treasurer had to go through, it's a much better way of working on it, and it does seem to work reasonably well. And where are our covenants located? You can tell which are our lake townships. And you can tell over here, West Marshland, that's mostly state wildlife area, and there isn't. I don't believe there's a lake other than a wildlife flowage in there, so that's why we don't have any there. But you can see our typical lake townships as far as it goes. And here's just, and by the way, this isn't quite up to date, but it gives you a concept of how they're distributed around the county. And that was an interesting point because back in when we first started this program, is the state was looking at it, oh, you should saturate and you should do this in one or two lakes and just focus in on it. And we said, no, this is a county program. We want to do this countywide. And I'm very happy that we did, because what this did, this got people on all the lakes saying, hey, it's important to have buffers and that we need to do this. And as a kid, it's kind of almost, call it the soft sell a little bit. And oh, yeah, our neighbors are doing this kind of thing. So it's gradually built it up and built it up, because I get not so much anymore because it's fairly well mature program, but I'd get called, what are those signs on that lake shore? You know, what's that about? So it did work to have those signs out, and it definitely was worthwhile to spread it out. And I'm very happy we did that. Okay, here's the good stuff. So what the heck have we done? Well, we put almost 53 miles of shoreline under covenant. And think about that being mostly 100 foot at a time. So we got a pile of covenants out there that we've had to develop, and it's 779 parcels. And you wouldn't think that that almost 3 acres of shoreline area restored is much, but when you think about the worst case scenario at a full 35-foot buffer is less than 1,400 square feet. So 2.9 acres is quite significant as far as it goes. But 53 miles is pretty good. And how do we handle this? We use a variety of staff. Some are full-time, some are contractors. You know, we have grants as far as the financial end, and the county matches the grants with a tax rebate. And this is about how what's happened on the finances. We worked very hard at getting grants for this. Is we've got quite a chunk, but you got to remember this has been 30 plus years of program work. And at 45 to 65 is probably much more reduced now than it has been in the past. We're much more lean and mean, so to speak, on this. We're probably more in the $35,000 to $40,000 range. And the county share, which because now they understand the value of water quality, they're kicking in right now about $37,000 a year, which is pretty doggone good for them to do that, because there's been some questions on the board. Why are we paying for this county? What's the value of it? You know, should we be only doing, you know, law enforcement, roads, and health and human services, especially when times are tight here now? So that's really helped, and they look at it and they understand that the value of the program is being returned in water quality benefits. So what are some of the issues, challenges that we've had with this? The time commitment, of course, it's not as bad now because it's a mature program. We're doing pretty good on that. Long-term follow-up has been always an interesting one. That's where we're working on right now. We try and do at least 10. Right now, our goal is to do 10% of the parcels every year as far as spot checking. So we're trying to really keep up on it. We focus in too on the new landowners, because that's probably one of our bigger issues that we do is and by the way, we also do send out, as soon as we get a notification that somebody in the program property is transferred, which we have a special numeric code on our parcel ID number that basically says that these people are in the program. When that happens, the tax lister, whoever's doing the recording now, is basically contacts us and says, hey, we've had a property transfer. We blast out a letter saying, hey, you're in the program, you got to do this, remember this, blah, blah, blah. And it usually generates a phone call from the new landowners asking about it, which works out pretty good because then I can explain things to them. we do have, that's probably the biggest issue we have, was either the previous landowners. We had a couple where unfortunately the previous landowners were of the old school thought that if it looks like the city park, it's going to sell better. So they went ahead, got the tax credit, cleared out the buffer, then turned around and sold it, and the new owner bought it. We came out and said, that's not going to work. And the new owner was not a very happy camper for a couple of reasons. One, he would have been more than happy with the buffer. He was basically ended up replanting the buffer himself instead of going back onto the owners or the real estate agent, because it was cheaper to do that. But that's still some of the kind of concepts we have to get through. And of course, sometimes we get new landowners that don't understand the program. Like I said, it's the same as shoreline zoning, or they're kind of not very enthused about it. And of course, ongoing money, when you're using a lot of soft funding, that's just the way it is. And what's interesting about, I wanted to put on here, these large lots, the length and depth of the buffer, and that kind of gets back into a little bit to the thing on the questionnaire. There were people were concerned about the depth of the buffer, but on the other hand, what we found, and if I was going to develop this program again, and of course, as I said before, we put this on a parcel basis because of the fact that it was the easiest to put onto the property tax bill, and it made the most sense to do it that way. So we said, okay, $50 per parcel, that's the way it is. But what we didn't think about, being new to this game, is that larger lots, up to, we have some that are in the program that they're basically 40 acres, and we have them in and they get $50, the same as a guy that has a 100-foot lot. So we should have had a graduated scale of length. For example, say a 100-foot lot would get $50, a 250-foot lot would get $100, greater than 350 would get $400 or something like that, because in a very few small cases, we're getting a large amount of shoreline protection from that. So that's one of the things, if we're going to do it again, we would actually do. And of course, what we'd also found too, which is we all know about now, is that runoff control is exceedingly important. One, for the protection of the buffer and allow the buffer to do its infiltration job, but it just was causing significant problems with water quality. So that's one of the things that we put into the program the last three times we went for a grant, is we do a lot of runoff control work through this now, and it's worked out very well. And especially with all of the hard rains we've been getting, it's very important. We're really seeing some nasty stuff on these sandy soils, comes off of surface roads and different things like that. So it's been very, very good. We've also, which I didn't mention in here, we also, through this program, we do something which, at least in Wisconsin, we call them fish sticks, which are basically your fish condos. And it also gets, actually, interestingly enough, gets back into water quality and shoreline protection, because it creates a nice quiet zone out in the lake and works out very well. And that's been a very good practice to use here. So a lot of our enforcement issues, initial documentation of the site. We do take pictures of every site. When we do it, we have a basic monster computer file of those. We're gradually shifting to a different program called Map Feeder now, and it's making it easier to sort. It's been pretty tough, but we do have documentation of what these sites were when they entered into the program. Of course, if we have to do any enforcement action or come back to these people, we can say, hey, yes, we know exactly what it looked like back then. One of the original things was the inconsistency of what they were documenting, because this program, when we started it, it went blasted and blew up so quickly. We had to develop, we didn't get much time to really develop our forms well. So at first we weren't perfect of getting the documentation. Now we have it, it's pretty doggone accurate. And what we could do also, sorry about that, is the follow-up and the change of ownership, which I mentioned too, and we're really working very hard at the annual spot checks as far as it goes. So that's kind of a thing that we really want to work at. And compliance is constant. We work with zoning as much as possible to turn around and keep things going. And when we do get something that basically is a violation, to get them enforced. And what we're working on right now, and getting down towards the end here, is we've been trying to quantify, because in our new program that we're using is we're able to sort by practices, by different programs and stuff like that. At least we're working and developing that. Is we're being able to try and come up with numbers that we can use for the nutrient reduction from these types of practices that we're doing. And we thought we had it done and kind of a basic little thing for nutrient management, or excuse me, sorry, for phosphorus from the buffers, but we came to conclusion we weren't sure if we were right, and we wanted to make sure that we were correct. So we're working with UW Stevens Point now on making sure we're correct what comes from a buffer, and we're actually taking some sample buffers and properties around here and trying to we can get a number there. And it's nice because once we get that, we can track it. We're tracking it now, but I want to make sure we're correct with those numbers first. And we also do the same with our infiltration systems or rain gardens, those types of things we're doing, rock trenches. We do all of that, and that's what we're guesstimating for around here, that the rock trenches and the rain guards provide for reduction. Each one, of course, is based on that. We can put in whatever model we're using for that nutrient reduction into our map feeder program. So then if we want to go back and question of how those numbers came up with that, we can figure out how that was done. So that's kind of the latest and the greatest on that and all of that sort of stuff. So with that, questions?
Thanks, Dave. That's a really excellent presentation, and I see you've got your contact information up there in case people need to reach out to you. We've now got an opportunity to ask questions. Again, if you hover your mouse over the screen and then go down to the bottom, you should see a Q&A button, and you can just type in your question there, and it'll pop up, and Dave will be able to answer it. I don't see any questions.
I was gonna say I probably put everybody to sleep.
They're overwhelmed with excitement, Dave, and so that they just don't know which question to ask first. I do have a question for you. Has there been any documentation of the ecological or ecosystem benefits from this program specifically? Do you have any anecdotes or surveys that you could share with us?
Could you repeat that again?
Is there any documentation of the ecological benefits of this program? For example, have participants seen more frogs in their properties, or bird usage, or that sort of thing?
No, we have not done that, other than what you would call the anecdotal evidence. And I know they're doing stuff with the fish sticks aspect of it. Right now we're looking at the sediment. Only thing is the sediment loading and the P reduction we're looking at as far as value there. We know that it's bringing in more shorebirds and different things like that, but there's been no specific documentation, although maybe UW Extension or Wisconsin DNR has done something like that. I think Mike Myers, if I remember right, there's been a study that was done over northeastern Wisconsin on that.
Okay, thanks. Do you see that participation in the program encourages neighbors to spread and attract other nearby landowners? Is there a neighbor effect?
There seems to be some. It's interesting. I had a couple that I know on this one lake, and they're anecdotally said, from when we started the program, to say like 5-10 years ago, he says, yeah, it seems like there's a lot more natural shorelines on the lake than there ever was before. And we do see that neighbor to neighbor, and then also just on the lake, as people tune around the lake in the evening, they see those signs, they see what's going on, and they talk about it in the lake association or in their little gathering. So yeah, it's some of that, especially too. And I was amazed. Will, like, for example, now I'll be very curious to see what we get from our lakes newsletter, because we usually get a significant bump of people that are interested in that, because how correct this is for all areas, but at one time we had a real estate company around here say that around here the lakeshore property turns around or turns over every 7 years, which doesn't seem to be too far out of matter. So we're always looking at new people coming in.
Wow, that's amazing. Have other counties in Wisconsin or other local governments that you're aware of, maybe outside of Wisconsin, used a similar program?
I'm not. I've
I'm
had
sorry, I
interest,
lost
but
you
I've
there.
never heard. Sorry.
The question was, have other counties in Wisconsin or elsewhere used or showed interest in creating a similar program?
Could you repeat that?
Have other counties in Wisconsin shown interest in creating a similar program, or have they used a similar program?
Okay. As far as it goes, I have interest from other county doing it. That was before we had it as a tax credit, and so there was significant concerns with that. I don't believe any county has ever adopted it. I've talked to a number of them as far as it goes. Mostly what I've seen in Wisconsin now is lake associations or county lakes groups that are interested in doing it on a lake level, and they're doing it on more of a voluntary basis. I think there's a couple, 3 over in the northeastern part of the state are doing that.
We just had a comment from another participant who mentioned that Shawano County and Menominee County in Wisconsin, I believe, have similar types of programs. Have any landowners challenged the covenant agreements? And if so, were you able to enforce them legally?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Please repeat.
Have any landowners challenged the covenant agreements in court? And were you able to enforce them?
I'm sorry, Joe, you're garbly on that. I heard enforcement, and that's about all I heard.
Court agreements, have you been challenged? And were you able to hold up in court?
A couple of times. They've been resolved reasonably amicably, though.
What was the economic value study you referenced?
That was from the Chippewa Valley Research Group. And I know that Bemidji State over in Minnesota did one a bunch of years ago, and I vaguely remember one from Maine too, but those are much older.
Okay, thanks. We'll provide a link to those in our follow-up email where we share the recording of the webinar. Can you explain the tax refund option a little bit more? There's a county in Minnesota who had the same issue implementing a tax credit because of state laws. So the question is, does the landowner just get a $50 check every year, or is there a tax bill $50 less?
They get a $50 check. Guess it's a County Burnett check.
Okay, I think those are all the questions that I see. And so unless I see any more, this is your last chance to ask. If I don't see any more, we'll wrap up here in a second. I want to take a moment to thank Dave for sharing this information on the Burnett County's program, the Shoreline Incentives Program. And I'll remind everyone that we record these webinars, and if you're interested in rewatching it or sharing it with somebody that you might think is interested in it, it'll be available on our website. I'll follow up with an email to every person that registered for this webinar to let them know that it's available once it's been posted. There's one question, one additional question. Where does the funding come from for the $50 refund?
That comes from the county.
Okay.
That's basically our match for anything else, but we've picked up the tax rebate in this case. That's our county share.
Gotcha. And I've got a note here from Ann Lane who mentions that Michigan, Minnesota, and New York have also expressed interest in the program, and there are also incentives for an enrollee. If their neighbor enrolls, the landowner who referred them is able to pick from items like a Shoreline t-shirt, a book about shoreline plantings, or a CD about shoreline restorations. Can you confirm that? Okay. Well, we're gonna wrap up today. Say thank you to all of our attendees for showing up, and thank you to Dave for participating. I hope you all have a good day, and don't forget to check out our next webinar on the 18th on the Shoreline Living publication promoting natural shorelines for property owners.